Thank you, Ian. It's a great honor to be here today among peers, to be talking to this legendary Melbourne Mining Club that I have attended so many times. I was appointed CEO of Orica in May, so I'm relatively new to the mining services. But however, I have probably more than 15 years of global mining, petroleum, and energy sectors. So I hope I understand the industry that Orica serves, our obligations, the opportunities, and the challenges of the resource sector. It is fair to say that everyone here today understands how challenging the current environment is. We had a small announcement this morning that sort of reflects that, the challenges we face. It's a tough time, but it's also a time of great opportunities, and that's what I hope to outline today. My time in the resource included the very best years of the cycle, the biggest mining boom probably ever. In fact, the commodity price and demand boom was one of the most significant events in history for the Australian economy. As we know, the 10 years to 2014, the price of Australia's mining exports tripled. By the end of 2013, the RBA estimates that the mining boom raised real per capita household disposable income by 13%. Probably with an even greater impact, resource-based exports went up to a high of 60% of the Australian economy. This was a boom like no other before, and none that we can foresee again. The extent of China's industrialization over this period was unprecedented and won't be repeated by any other country. Just 10 years ago, China was producing around 300 million tons of crude steel annually. Last year, it produced 820 million tons. Between 2013 and 2011, China's GDP growth was near or at double-digit growth every year. There's one statistic that I particularly find illustrates what China has been going through, and it's to compare the cement consumption of what was until now the most richest country on earth, which is the United States. So if you take all of the cement that the United States consumed in the 20th century in 100 years, it's what China consumes every 2 years now. So it is unprecedented. The commodity prime boom delivered value for stakeholders across the board. One of the great features of the higher price environment was that everyone participated in one way or another. We saw that particularly in the monetization of lower quality resources for the benefit of supply-short resource customers, employees, shareholders, governments, and communities. And while we all know that this is a cyclical industry, now that we have come to the inevitable retreat of the cycle, it feels as though not everyone is prepared for this new reality. We all enjoy the boom times, but many feel quite overwhelmed right now. My view is that this is because we're all flexing to our own advantage during the good times. While prices and demands were at their peak, we didn't come together across the industry, let alone across stakeholders, to make sure that we maximize the benefits together. This is a logical outcome of the times. So as we all just focus on keeping up with demand that was clearly outstripping supply. The unprecedented prices were not sustainable. We have witnessed a demand-supply mining cycle for generations. There will always be a time when supply catches up with demand, and there will always be another point in time when demand outstrips supply. Booms don't last, but fundamentals endure. So the next phase in the cycle is here, and it's marked by global market volatility, structural shifts, and margin headwinds for both miners and companies that service them. China's GDP growth has slowed. It's still an impressive 7%, but another way of looking at it, it's the slowest in the last 25 years. So we're officially back to the 90s. The price cycle has shifted as supply and demand levels move closer together. The market has worked. The pricing outlook for metals and mining globally remains subdued as China moves from the industrialization phase into a consumption-led growth. India, the other great industrialization company, also had a 7.4% growth in 2014. But of course, India is not China, and it will never be. India's steel output was the equivalent of around 10% of China. In my view, India's industrial intensity is never going to be as high as China. In fact, we're actually seeing skip the industrialization phase and go straight into a service economy and a consumption-based phase. There's also consequences in the type of development of many more cities, much less high-rise buildings, and all of that, that will lead, in the end, India to probably have a total consumption of steel peak at around 250 million, so far off from where China is today. This means lower prices for bulk commodities for the medium term, and in reality, we're unlikely to see inducement price in the bulk commodities for a decade. There are grounds for longer-term optimism for base metals, and in particular copper, because demand for copper plateaus much later in the industrialization cycle. Steel intensity tapers off when GDP per capita reaches around $15,000 on a purchase parity basis, while copper demand keeps growing until GDP per capita hits between $30,000 and $35,000. China accounts for around 45% of global refined copper demand, and by the end of 2014, its GDP capita was around 13,000. So copper is expected to benefit from rising renewable energy usage and the extension of power supply to the hundreds of millions of people, also in India, where don't have access to electricity. The story of iron ore and coal is somewhat different. Across the globe, we are seeing early signs of consolidation in the bulk commodities. Volumes will keep growing, but we won't again see the prices that we saw in the past, as miners' relative position on the cost curve becomes more important and the highest cost producers get squeezed out. This is just the beginning. As a result, there is an increased focus in the sector on productivity, with an emphasis on cost-reducing strategies and capital expenditure containment. Increased price volatility has led the mining industry to develop more flexible operating strategies, adaptable mine plans, and to find ways to embed long-term efficiencies to create greater resilience. With challenges come opportunities. While it's not surprising that the dramatic movements in pricing has challenged the industry, focusing too intensely on falling commodity prices can cause us to miss the substantial opportunities that the present still offers. The supplier-customer relationship has an increasing importance in creating strategic, competitive advantage and shareholder value on both sides, particularly in working together to improve productivity and manage risks. Productivity should not be considered as synonym for cost-cutting or investment deferrals. These in themselves do not create long-term sustainable value. The real productivity opportunity is in maximizing both the quantity and value of the output from the lower capital invested. This brings significant opportunity. With margin pressures across the board, we should develop more enduring, sustainable relationships throughout the production chain that embed great value for everyone over the longer term. Relationships that have successful and seamless integration across industry boundaries and that are focused on the innovation and value generated through holistic partnerships. For example, if we look for the good examples outside of our industry, the automotive industry tightly links suppliers to the production plans of the automotive companies, requiring close coordination from the concept phase to design, production, and delivery. Toyota has developed long-term partnerships with its key suppliers in Japan over decades, with the philosophy that both sides of the partnership should consider the other a strategic partner rather than a supplier or a customer. There are hard and soft measurement tools as part of this to ensure the value of the partnership is delivered upon them. But they enter these partnerships with the core belief that neither side should be focused on maximizing the benefits to the detriment of the other. Another example, good example, is global consumer goods manufacturer Procter & Gamble, which is not only an innovation leader in its industry, but also a leader in building collaborative and effective supplier relationships. More than half of all of its product innovation includes at least one major element from external partners who are significant source for innovation across materials, products, supply chain, services, and business models. By successfully integrating innovation throughout the value chain, P&G shareholders have benefited over the long run. P&G has delivered dividend increases for 58 consecutive years. Partnerships work best when both the risks and the opportunities are shared between suppliers and producers. Suppliers have to take the downside risks if they want to gain greater benefits from the upside. In order to create the enduring partnership model in the mining sector, suppliers and customers have to shift their thinking. It is a leap to move from a product buy-sell relationship to a more productive relationship focused on creating greater value from the concept of delivery. Mining services companies have been speaking about this for some time, but along the way we have expected our customers to automatically see the benefit and bring us to the table. This hasn't happened in a material sense, so we need to better understand the barriers and then foster a willingness on both sides to make significant mind shifts to realize the benefits. Some of the barriers, contractual relationships versus partnerships. There is quite a natural commercial tension between suppliers and customers that will always be a reality, but the real barrier comes when contractual negotiations rule the relationship. If the relationship becomes fixated on terms and conditions, then those relationships will always be fraught. Finding a way through this to focus on the philosophy and objectives of the relationship is the only way to forge more mutually beneficial relationships. And as an example, look at the move in iron ore away from annual benchmark negotiations to shorter-term market-clearing pricing, but at the same time long-term volume commitments. Supplier-customer relationships that for years were tense and fraught with hostility are now on a more keen level. Those relationships can now focus on what is critically important to both producer and consumers, long-term value-based agreements. At this point in the cycle, miners are doing what they should. They are cutting costs by reducing capital expenditure, exploration, and reviewing headcount, and in some cases, supplier agreements. They are optimizing their operations to reduce wastage. But the real maximization of productivity benefits comes when miners actively manage the whole chain through strategic partnerships based on long-run value creation. There is a general wariness on both sides to experiment and pilot new technologies, and in some sectors of the mining industry, there is a reluctance to invest in innovation at this point of the cycle. The mining and metal sector spends 90% less on technology and innovation than the petroleum sector, 90% less. This is despite the fact that targeted innovation adds genuine value. This can be seen through relatively recent innovations in oil and gas, including shale and coal seam gas extraction and floating LNG platforms, which have given greater access to reserves and delivered significant productivity benefits. But again, there is a general reticence among miners to be the first to test new products, particularly on the back of significant investments already sunk in major mining projects. For example, a couple of years ago, Orica developed a new blasting technique that negates the need to mine the undercut level and allows drawable cavity generation in a single blast. It's the single level drawable blasting project. This is a technique that has the potential to revolutionize block caving and significantly reduce the initial capital investment and operating costs. The value we can prove is tangible, but we can't expect our customers to adopt new applications or services just because we tell them they should. It is up to us, the service provider, to prove the value. We have to accept our part in the risk. That takes a different mindset in our customer interactions, a different mindset in our whole customer sales force. We can share the risks and benefits, but it requires trust and commitment from both sides. Procurement versus marketing. There is a mismatch that often exists between the procurement processes in the mining industry and the sale processes on the supply side. A top-down focus on productivity and efficiency has led to centralized procurement functions, which could mean that the people furthest away from the operations are often making procurement decisions on behalf of mine site operations. On the one hand, this often achieves what is set out to do because centralized procurement functions leverage their scale for efficiency benefits. But it can also mean that the conversation between producer and supplier are driven towards contractual pricing, terms, and condition level. These are functions that are rewarded on that basis, despite the fact that the lowest cost option is not the one that necessarily adds the most value. We have seen this create tension between procurement departments and people at the coalface who understand much better the concept of value in their asset. There is nothing inherently wrong with centralized procurement as long as it genuinely supports its company's operation by enabling them to focus on value creation through direct relationships with the service partners. As suppliers, we need to ensure we have strong relationships with both our customers, operations, and central procurement functions, and we are focusing on the issues that matter to both. The mining sector is an industry that's well accustomed to long-term planning. Conversations in major mining companies are shaped by a multi-decade through-the-cycle outlook. Major capital investments decisions are made with a multi-generation production view, but when it comes to operational improvements, the short-term focus often wins. When it comes to achieving operational improvements, suppliers have to apply long-term strategic thinking and application that supports customers in using the same multi-decade approach. Ineffective use of big data. We have a wealth of information across this industry, but we do not use it effectively. We all collect data individually, but if we could collect, aggregate, and use this information collectively with our customers, we could better understand the trends, the value, the varieties, and the variability. This again already happens in oil and gas, where the challenges and risks are so often greater, so the incentive to innovation is higher. Schlumberger, for example, is mastering big data. It is using data combined with specialist software platforms to enable its customers to standardize workflows from exploration to production and to make more informed decisions with a clear understanding of both opportunities and risks. This requires collaborative partnership between Schlumberger and its customers. Closer to home, Woodside recently announced it was partnering with IBM to develop advanced predictive data science to make use of its historical internal data from 3 decades of running LNG and other operations to improve its ability to run efficiently and better design, fabricate, and construct large oil facilities. So what does this mean for all of us? I have said many times that Orica needs to get closer to the customer, but this requires structural and behavioral changes across the board with some heavy lifting from us. While some progress has been made, we still have a long way to move from being a supplier of choice to a true partner in the mining sector, despite having a natural advantage. For example, we have our people in more locations than anyone else. Some 450 mine sites across every type of market and operation, from developing economies through to highly mature, sophisticated markets and operations. We undertake around 1,500 blasts around the world every day. When you think about this, we essentially have an expansive big data collection and knowledge base that could be fully leveraged to link customer sites and regions and enable the very best in knowledge transfer. We also invest 3 times more than our competitors on innovation and R&D and can demonstrate how this leads to improved productivity for our customers through advanced blasting services, data recording, management and analysis for optimal productive blasting results. This is why we know we can do and we can add significant value for our customers. For example, by improving fragmentation in gold operations, we have helped our customers reduce their power consumption and therefore their unit cost. But we have to make changes, again, in how we operate, so the case for being a partner to our customers is overwhelming and compelling. We also have to make sure we're operating in the optimal way for us and our customers. This includes empowering our people who are closest to our customers, enabling their day-to-day decision-making so they can work with customers to both anticipate their needs and respond more efficiently and effectively. Like a lot of businesses with a substantial geographic spread, we let ourselves involve too many internal stakeholders in everyday decisions at the operational level. This also affects the amount of time we can spend with our customers. If we want to forge deeper, more meaningful relationships, we have to free up our people to enable them to spend more time with our customers. We have to be clear about our own total value proposition versus our product proposition, so that is clear, without any question to our customers. Knowing our value also means getting better at bundling our products and services so that the value is obvious. Sometimes our customized approach holds both us and our customers back from getting more value of our product and services. And as I've said before, sharing the risks. A true partnership means sharing risks and benefits through every part of the cycle. We can't expect our customers to embrace us as partners if we don't do the same. As a supplier, the obligation is on us to prove our value, and this means taking on some of the downside risks too. This may mean taking on more risk in trialing new products and services in order to demonstrate value and lay legitimate claim to benefiting with our partners when our value is delivered. In conclusion, it is precisely at this point in the cycle that we have an incentive to leverage our customers and our knowledge and know-how for mutual benefit. The commodity price boom has ended, but production growth and exports of bulk commodities persist. The mining production boom may still continue. It's the mining price boom that has ended, with volume still expected to grow in line with GDP and demand still strong from China and India in particular. While there is no denying that we are now in far more challenging times, there are always more opportunities to achieve systemic, sustainable productivity gains. Orica is increasingly focused on working with our customers to develop better outcomes in productivity, cost and safety, and in minimizing environmental impacts. This requires a partnership between us and our customers with a commitment to sharing risks and benefits and taking the long-term view. Most importantly, it calls for a willingness to innovate. The mining industry has proven time and again that it cannot innovate when the environment demands it, and it can and does reinvent itself in cycle turns. We have been here before, but let's prepare better this time for the next boom. At Orica, we have some challenges. Our success is tied to production volumes, which continue to rise rather than commodity prices. So that gives us probably some greater resiliency. But our fortunes are also linked to the overburden, and we've been seeing reductions in stripping ratios as miners adapt their plans for the current environment. In the medium to longer term, I'm optimistic about what we can achieve. Our industry structure is robust, and Orica is continuing to build its resilience. I believe we are a company with greater value to offer the mining sector because it will be those companies who best manage the risks and opportunities that will be best positioned to take advantage of the next cycle. Mining companies have more to gain from shifting to a supply partnership philosophy, but only if we prove our value, and only if there's a commitment on both sides to true innovation, both in operational application and in how decisions are made. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Alberto. Now, we have two roving microphones around the room. Gavin Collery and Richard Shoddy are each available. So if you have a question for Alberto, would you please raise your hand, get the microphone, state your name and affiliation, and fire away.
While Richard's looking for one, I've got one, Alberto, Gavin Collery here. When Riley Bechtel spoke with the Melbourne Mining Club a few years back, one of the key points he made as a service company to the mining industry was their failure or their poor management of contracts and contractors. How do you see that issue of managing contractors by mining companies and vice versa in the context of what you've said to us today?
Look, I think, probably let me tell you about large mining companies where I've come from, and with large contractors, that's really not an issue. That's probably would be an issue for smaller services company. I think that in some sense, large mining companies, and we've seen it again in this current cycle, don't like to change. If they're comfortable with a contractor, if it's safe, and if it sort of proves that it sells at market, I think large mining companies are reluctant to change. So I think that there is an inherent advantage for companies, let's say large companies who can have the processes and the safety like Orica to build these relationships with large companies and medium-sized companies.
Richard, have you got one there? While Richard's finding one there, Richard.
Hi, I'm Anand from University of Melbourne. Thanks for a great talk. I was just wondering that you mentioned you're a global operation, and to satisfy the need to work with the customers. So different customers in different countries obviously have different needs. So how do you go on about satisfying those needs in those countries? Thanks.
Thank you. That very interesting question, and that's part of the difficulty. What I say that we, as a mining company, have still a lot to, as a mining services company, have still a lot to do with our mining services, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. We have persons, about 4,500 people at about 500 sites across the world. And each asset is different. You can categorize saying, well, hard rock and then license to operate issues, and there's this plain vanilla, let's say, coal ones. So you can categorize, but each one has its own particularities. So that's why the training that is involved in understanding that each customer has its own needs, its own particularities, and that you have to build the case for each customer is something that is not easy to do. We have about roughly 1,000 customers, 1,000 contracts all around the world. So in some way, each is unique. And so it is a challenge. It is probably, that's the greatest challenge. It's not like building a one-size-fits-all.
Thanks, Kevin. Owen Hegarty speaking. Alberto, thank you very much for that. A wonderful, wonderful speech, and in the great tradition of great speakers here at the Melbourne Mining Club. Well done. The question relates to new technology. I mean, you spent a lot of time talking about the customers and working with them. You spent a lot of time talking about new technology and innovation, and thank you very much for that. Can you give us some examples of where Orica or your industry is actually going to provide further innovation, if you like, in the industry? Thank you.
Thank you, Alan, for your question and your comments. I'll give you two very quick sort of examples. So we have developed in advanced blasting services. One of them is high density explosives, so much 2-3 times more powerful than the normal in the market. When we apply those explosives to hard rock, basically in copper and gold, what we have seen in some of the mines is that we have increased the throughput of the mine by about 5% and lowered power consumption by about 6%. So when you take into account that the value of explosives is only about 4 or 5% of the total cost of a mining operation, you can impact a significantly more than its own value by that example, improving fragmentation. And so then that's a good example of where almost value-driven approach almost swamps even the whole cost of the explosive. On technology right now at the forefront, we're also working on a wireless technology that will probably have a very important effect on underground mining. If you look at the time delays and costs that are involved in underground explosions and all the wiring that is involved, and if you move to wireless, and we already have successful explosion with wireless at mines 800 meters deep, that will surely change how things are done in underground. So we have, again, many examples of these type of products, and that's why it's so important to keep investing, and we will keep out investing our competition, because in the end, that's how we can prove to our customers that we can increase their value significantly. Again, as I say, much more than whatever low costs the explosives represent. Yes.
Alberto Jamasky. I have no knowledge of your balance sheet, and I have no knowledge of what you announced this morning, so please take this question accordingly. I've had a parallel career all my life in mining services, and as well as direct involvement in the hard end of the business. Philosophically, for a mining services company, particularly one so international, what should your balance sheet look like? How do you handle debt, and how do you accommodate the currencies, all the currencies you deal with? Thank you.
So how we think, let's say, in terms of at a high level of priorities, I think we have moved to what we call a more capital light approach. I probably define it as a capital efficient approach. So we probably putting a much tighter control on return on asset employed. That metric, I think, should illuminate everything we do. So with that in mind, let's say our investment a year is about 350 to 400. So then the rest of the prioritization is we do want to keep an investment credit rating that we have, and probably, and a good example is that the first call I made today after the announcement was with S&P. And so we have good relationship with them. We're comfortable with everything that we announced today. We believe that we will able to keep that investment rating, so that's very important. Next in line is we have a dividend policy for many years, and that's important. I don't want to preempt it, but all of the efforts is on keeping that dividend, let's say, policy for the past years. It's called a progressive, but that's we want to try to keep that. And then if there's any money left, we have buybacks. So we have a buyback in place right now. We have said today that we're announcing on the review. So we want to make sure that we deliver the first 3, and then we see if we have anything left with the buyback. So, and in these times, I believe we have to be much more cautious than ever. But our balance sheet, just to say, is very strong. Our cash flow generation is very strong. So even in these times, there's no issues on that front, fortunately.
Joe Kukutsu, Managing Director of Myer International. Thank you very much for your presentation.
I think you mentioned that in this current cycle, Orica is looking for cooperation from its customers or collaboration. Dare I say, driving some sort of co-innovation sort of strategy. I'm interested to understand how you're pursuing that, what sort of response you're getting from your customers, and what type of customer is actually collaborating with you in driving innovation.
So we have right now across the world trials, in particular in hard rock mining in South America and in Central America and Mexico. We have trials going on to prove our point. So that's where we say we run our risks to prove our point. And our point with these mining operations of copper and gold is that we can improve the fragmentation, we can improve the throughput through their concentrators, and we can reduce their power consumption. Those, let's say, trials take time. It may take 18 months or 24 months. So you need a commitment from the asset. You need to have, obviously, the credibility, but then you need a commitment from both sides. I'm happy to say that we are progressing on that. We also, let's say at a lesser level, but we have probably have with one of the largest mining companies in the world, we've again renewed contracts with a significant part of their operations, and a big part of this is using advanced blasting elements, IS, electronic blasting systems and others. So there has been a receptivity, but it's not something that we can prove in a day. So it requires trust and building relationship, and that's something that will take, this is a journey. This will be a year's journey. It's not a month's journey.